Ohayou gozaimasu. Konnichiwa, konbanwa. Welcome to this week's call and response. I'm John, and this is Likai.
Hi everyone.
This podcast is an attempt to find ways to put what we read into action to not only get the most out of the books, but also, more importantly, to improve our lives. So this podcast is for you if you're curious to see the real-world applications of the principles discussed in the books. We're going to start off the podcast with a summary and then move on to our Q&A section. So Lika is going to take away for the summary section.
Moving on to the summary section, the book The Courage to be Disliked by Kishimichiro, a clinical psychologist and philosopher, along with Koga Fumitake, a writer, is a Japanese analysis of the work of 19th century psychologist Alfred Adler, who established that happiness lies in the hands of each human individual and does not depend on past traumas, and shows us methods to be our truest selves by having the courage to be disliked, take control of our future, and achieve happiness using a few simple principles. We broke the book into two sections, and first one was finding ways to interpret our lives differently, using the theories and kind of principles that are discussed in the book. And so, for example, like we mentioned a little bit earlier, how traumas don't exist, and that we are subject to only the meanings we label those traumas or experiences with, and so these meanings you attach to the experiences ultimately change your outlook in life as well, and how you take on new challenges. Other stuff are like separation of tasks, where we can only control what we can control, and how everything else is out of our control. So we don't have to invest our time and effort into those stuff, into anything outside of our control or circle. And a great saying that encapsulates this lesson is, you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't make the horse to drink it. And there's also a subtopic of desire of approval, such in Japanese it will be shonin yokyu. And on the surface, the desire of approval sounds selfless on the surface, but is actually coming from the selfishness, and also this approval isn't necessarily your responsibility to attain, and it is merely out of your control. And so this is like another example of separation of tasks. Right. And then finally, we attain freedom by feeling okay with being disliked by others. And so these are a little different frameworks we can learn from the book to interpret our lives a little bit more differently. And in the second section of the summary, or I should say the book, is taking actionable steps to achieve a happier life based on the methods we discussed or the theories we discussed in part one. And so some of the topics includes yoko no kankei, or the importance of horizontal relationship in comparison to hierarchical relationships. Other topics include tashakoken, or the goal of life is to contribute and help others. And then lastly, there's like different ways of looking at life, and excuse me, the author talks about how life is meaningless, and a different way, but a great way to approach life is to live in the moment, like you're dancing, and not necessarily you're going from point A to point B. And we will talk a little bit more about it in the Q&A section, using through our questions and our responses. So moving on to the Q&A section, we have 4 or 5 questions today, and the first one is, the author discusses deeply about ego and competitive spirit being a hindrance in our lives. My question is, do you find yourself being competitive, John? And if you do you think they have been helpful or detrimental to you? And are you trying to do anything about it? Do you think all types of competitiveness are inherently bad?
I think I used to be competitive, especially up till high school, but I realized that this motivation for being competitive came from outside of me. For example, like my parents, my peers, peer pressure, or through academic pressure. And it was more of a means to fulfill somebody else's cup. And I did, as a result, get better at studying and playing sports and whatnot, but I feel like this was out of ill will, which was just to be better than the person next to me so that I'll be praised for it by people outside, people around me. But after coming to terms with that, I think now I use competitiveness to, in a sense, quantify my abilities or capabilities to try to understand where I am, um, so that I can take actions accordingly and to improve myself, ultimately to improve myself. So I think the focus shifted from pleasing another person to try to improve myself. For example, there's a ranked system in the games I play and in the language learning apps that I use, where it quantifies your efforts and performances. And this helps me understand how much work I put in, how much work I need to put in order to get to a place where I want to. And it also helps me set an objective or set a goal for the things that I want to do. So in that sense, it's helping me improve my abilities. And yeah, with that said, I don't think competitiveness is inherently bad. And I think it's more of like a tool that we can use to accelerate our growth. But I think it's really important to clarify your objective and motivation to use your competition. So it's kind of like a knife where you can cut vegetables, but you can also harm other people depending on your objective, how you use the tool.
So in my case, I do find myself being competitive time to time, and I think it's been kind of both helpful and detrimental. But there, but a lot of times it's like being competitive led me to be in a better position. So for example, like during my interview season for my internship, there are a lot of websites out there that provide resources for like practical or practicing technical interview questions, frequently asked in like software engineering positions. And these websites usually gamify the platform, like, you know, John, you're talking about rank system, and like you said, kind of like similar to like Duolingo and all these other platforms where you can see your score and metrics. And there's even tournaments for people solving these technical problems. And so I think gamification helped me really like rank myself or see my rank and compare myself to other people, and ultimately kind of feel my motivation to study harder and be better at solving these questions. And so this isn't really, I guess, helpful competitiveness. But on the other hand, there's like times when competitives can be detrimental, where like, I guess in a more general sense, it can severely discourage you from taking further actions to improve yourself, like the inferiority complex discussed in the book, or even worse, like encourages you to take harmful actions to yourself, or even worse, to others. So I think it's a very dangerous territory that competitiveness can sometimes cripple your motivation and progress in life. So it's, yeah, like you said, like a knife, like you gotta be intentional with the competitiveness, where you bring your competitiveness in your life, and the outcome of that. And so, yes, they're good and bad, but I think and also in the book is mentioned that the ultimate way to stay, or ultimate way, I guess it would be to be competitive just with yourself. And I want to borrow this like metaphor from this psychiatrist called Dr. K, who does a lot of counseling sessions on Twitch, and also there's a lot of videos on YouTube of him. But he had an amazing metaphor where he said each of us is like a character, or like an arbitrary character, like a character generated arbitrarily in video games, and then like each character has its own single player mode and like its own story mode. And so it never makes sense to compare yourself to another person's story mode or another person's character, because, you know, it could be in totally different video games, totally different world or realms, and like it doesn't make sense. So I really like that analogy, and like that really clicked with me. And I think so that's to say, like, don't compare yourself with others. It doesn't make sense that you're comparing apples with oranges. But so, you know, some people might say, yeah, but was brought up with, say, like John, like for example, if I were to say, hey John, we grew up in this really similar environment, um, in a neighborhood and environment and family and all that stuff, but I think I would argue even then, like, you know, your family is different from my family, the values are different, cultures are different, we're different, from different ethnicity, nationality, so even the slightest little difference is gonna make a huge difference. And even like my brother's like 5 years older, but I guess his like generation is different from my generation, so it doesn't make sense to compare, even though you might think you are similar to those people. But my last point that I want to elaborate on is that it's like competitiveness is innate. That's what it is. Innate. It's always going to be there. It's inevitable. It's always going to be there for you or with you. And I think that's the case, because I like to look at things in more like evolutionary perspective. And say like you're in a marathon, and if you can compare yourself against other runners and see which place you're in, then you can start maybe picking your pace up or stuff like that. You can just kind of adjust your situation based on your comparisons with other people and say, I need to do this, do that. So it makes sense to kind of like compare, right? And so I think or like let's just say survival wise, it makes sense to compare, but maybe that's not the best way to make you happy. Or competitiveness doesn't bring happiness to you; it brings you survivability. So I think this book is like is a like we John, we were talking. I think it was a funny way, a really cool way to say that, like, our like there are different human inclinations that we naturally are subject to, but this book, I mean, yeah, that we're subject to, right? But these are all like emotions and urges that are wired throughout the tens and thousands of years, and so our hardware, our body, is like really old and outdated. But this book is like a really fresh software update, iOS update, that helps you look at your or helps you manage your emotions and hardware in a different way. That's a little bit more at the modern and smooth and like less stressful. And so competitiveness I think is always going to be there, but it's up to you how you will use it and wield it, if you will. So the next question pertains to the hierarchical versus flat or horizontal relationships. And the author argues that hierarchical relationships, through condemning or praising, is detrimental, because when you have a hierarchical relationship, who you might start depending on those who have a higher or the superior's opinions and thoughts, and that kind of also relates to the separation of tasks and how you start to depend on their task or their opinion or how they think about. So the best is to flatten the hierarchy and make it horizontal, so that that I guess dependency is taken out. And the author suggests that in order to maintain the horizontal relationship is by saying thank you and showing gratitude instead of condemning and praising. But I had a question, because so it makes sense to thank people for behaviors that we respect or admire. So that's the positive side that we talked about. But in order, that reinforces the act again when you thank it. But say like when you're condemning something in the hierarchical world, you would condemn. But in the horizontal world, how do you can't just say thank you to some behaviors that you don't want the other person to continue. So how do you maintain the horizontal relationship, but also at the same time change the course of their action?
So in order to, in a way, complain about their negative behaviors, right?
Yeah.
There's this quote from this author and artist called Austin Kleon, who who says, if you want to complain about a software, make a better software. And I think this encapsulates what I would do, which is to think about what you can do next or better as a way of criticizing what they did, without making a hierarchy. And I think this is more focused on the objective of improving the situation rather than just taking advantage of the hierarchy and providing negative feedback with the hope of preventing that behavior from happening again. Or, I don't know, some people might just feel good by simply subjugating others and feeling superior about it. I think that's a waste of time and energy, and it does nothing to the situation, and I think it just causes negative. It provides people with negative motivations. It demotivates people, I think, because it's a destructive way of interacting or motivating people. So I think, just to reiterate, suggesting ways to do things better the next time would be the best criticism I would give.
So just to clarify, in a horizontal world, you want to, when you want to praise someone, instead of praising, you want to thank. When you want to criticize someone in the horizontal world, you suggest a different, you make a suggestion. I just Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's the extent you can go to, like based on what we talked about bringing the horse to the water and having them choose to drink the water themselves.
I see. Yeah, like without going too far as to force them to do anything, but kind of just suggest them to do stuff.
I think it's our responsibility to like try to bring them to the water instead of being like giving them a vague idea of where their water might be. I don't know, some people might think that having them find where the water is a good opportunity to learn or think for themselves too, which I do agree to a certain extent too, but I don't think it applies to every single, well, in both ways. Like, I don't think anything applies to every single example. So I guess this, me saying that I would suggest a better solution next time is my suggestion for criticism.
Yeah.
It's not like this should happen or anything. Yeah.
That's it's true. Okay, so so the third question I had was so in the book the author made a big statement of feeling of contribution is happiness, and so in order to feel happy you have to contribute, or I guess you have to feel like you're contributing. And if you agree with the statement, can you think back to the moments maybe this statement was true in your life, and how do you plan to kind of execute on this principle and contribute more in the future, and keep contributing more in the future? And do you think there are certain things that only you can do best to contribute in the world?
So I recently watched a documentary on this animation movie called Evangelion, since their last movie of the series was coming to an end and was going to be released. It just got released, but it was a documentary documenting the behind the scenes of the production process, and they followed the creator Anno Hideaki for 4 years he spent making the film, and his philosophy was to prioritize the work of art over his life, and because that's what gets passed on to the next generation. And when he was asked why he goes to that extent, he answered, because this is the only thing that I was interested and was good at that could contribute to this world. And to me, this felt like this should be the way to live as a person, to live accordingly to our curiosities and abilities and try to contribute to the world as a result of that. And looking back to my experiences, I felt great fulfillment when I got messages from people that bought my photo books, thanking me for the virtual travel that I gave them, because I made a photo book of my travels to Spain and Morocco. They also told me how much they enjoyed it and how it motivated them to take more photos or even make a photo zine or photo book themselves. So yeah, and the photo book was like a compilation of photos that I thought were most interesting. So it was the photos that I loved, more importantly, um, which was kind of like an act of my act of rebellion against this trend of social media where photos that are liked the most are valued the most. So yeah, this sense of curiosity. So my product of curiosity encouraging action in other people was such a fulfilling feeling. And yeah, I think it's one of the greatest feelings I've ever had in my life so far. And I felt a similar sense of happiness when, after making a couple of YouTube videos that explained how I scan film or how certain films look different when they're expired, and seeing people comment how they learned something from the video and how they wanted to implement what they learned or what they got out of the video was similarly fulfilling. So yeah, it was a sense of curiosity helping other people's lives that was really, yeah, fulfilling. It made me really happy. And I think reflecting on that process, I think I have a combination of characteristics to be a potential good content creator in this film photography or photography realm, especially in Japan on YouTube. I do have a relatively good sense of aesthetics. I have the ability to plan and edit videos, and I can speak English and Japanese natively. And also because I want to see film photography channels in Japan, and the fact that there aren't many, I think I could contribute to the platform in that way. And I think another area that I would like to contribute is in the realm of self-development, and I think, yeah, self-development. And so I'm currently taking life coaching classes online, and I'm practicing exercises on friends and hearing them tell me that they were able to think in ways that they couldn't imagine before, or how it's helping them be more productive, or how it improved their sense of focus is it really motivates me to keep improving myself to make better influences in other people's lives. So yeah, I think those are the two areas that I can contribute to this world right now, based on my genuine sense of curiosity. Like, these are the things that I'm most interested in right now.
Yeah, I mean, fulfillment and contribution and happiness, and it's kind of just always tied together. It seems like, whatever, no matter what the activity is. So, and so like in my case, like I wanna, so I watched a video of Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. He also said that in one of his interviews that like his ultimate goal in life is to contribute, and I'm slowly also starting to see that how that is also could be my goal as well. And the book also talks about getting your self-worth from the feeling of contributing to others and all that stuff. So knowing that, so one thing I think back to, so the time when I was really helpful would be being a tutor in undergrad and also in grad school. And although teaching was always something I was interested in, like it never occurred to me how much I love teaching and seeing until I saw my students' faces like light up and understand something. And so it is one of the greatest pleasures in my life. And it's also best when they kind of go out of their way to thank me and even sometimes give me credit for their hard work and their success. So I'm really grateful for that. And I think teaching and tutoring is has a unique characteristic where it's the reward or the contribution, the feeling of contribution is really clear, or like you can easily attain that because it's tangible outcome, and that can be on their report card, their grades, or their faces, like I mentioned earlier. So it's really tangible feedback. So it's a really great way for me to feel like I'm contributing. It does make me happy a lot. And then so I want to mention that because in the book it's talked about sometimes you don't even have to kind of contribute in order to feel happy. You just have to feel like you're happy, feel like you're contributing in order to feel happy. But luckily, teaching does give me that, both feeling and also I can actually see it. So, and in terms of the last question, which is about, do you think there are certain things that I can only I can do best? Definitely not only me, but I think using my strengths, I think teaching is one of the things I can be one of the better teachers. Yeah, because two reasons. One is that I'm confident in how patient I can be with students and how welcomed and accepted I can make them feel. And part of this is possible because like I mentioned in part 1 of this podcast, I have a high tendency to want to be liked by everyone. And so I talked about it more as a disadvantage earlier, but here it's more handy because in teaching you wanted to be liked by everyone. And so I do everything to adapt to the other person's personality, communication style, and so on and so forth. So I think because that, and also on top of that, I'm a very sensitive person. So naturally my wordings are on the softer side of the spectrum, and this consequently like helps students feel more safe, which we learn in Culture Code, the book Culture Code, that safety is a crucial part of a functional group. And if you combine teachers and students as a group, then I think that's also key. And part 2, or I should say reason 2 of why I think I could be a good teacher is because I seem to understand what people are trying to ask without much explanation from their part. And I was surprised to hear this from a student for the first time. She mentioned that I was good at understanding what the question or confusion was before she finished explaining. And to me, that is like, it was one of the best compliments I've ever heard. But after that, I started reflecting on it and kind of watched myself be more aware of it. And I feel like I might be good at it. I don't know. I don't want to say myself, but I started having more confidence in it and detecting nuances and questions that students actually mean to ask. And, that might just be from experiences because I taught the same classes or content. If you repeat for a while, there are certain questions that come up all the time. So that might be a case. So I'm not gonna, kind of hype myself up too much. But yeah, for those reasons, I think teaching is it has a place in my heart. Yeah.
It really seems like we have specific assets where we can see ourselves contributing for the world. I also think that this can change. These assets can change along time based on, of course, the circumstances too, but like what we're interested in at that time. It might be just that you're interested in teaching because you just finished undergrad and had the experience of tutoring certain people. Maybe it might be something else radically different in the future when you have a different job or whatever, and that can go.
That's true.
That can be the same for my end. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate how the mindset is more important than how we contribute. It's just the idea that we want to contribute. That's the most important thing, I think.
And in the later questions, or one of the later questions, we'll talk about the dance, life as a dance versus point A to point B. We'll talk about that, and I think it's kind of related to that. So, like you said, as long as we have the willingness to help, it doesn't matter how we help. It's like just helping, contributing itself is the core part. Yeah.
So the philosopher says in the book that the moment we allow the criteria or standards of others to influence our actions, it's an act of essentially stepping on the brakes of our own freedom. So I wanted to ask, have you experienced moments when you thought that what you did was valuable because of someone else's praise, even though you were not really satisfied with it? And if so, how do you think we can prevent ourselves from being engulfed or driven by other people's standards or criteria and being more grounded in our own?
So I can't think of moments when I thought that I did was more valuable because someone praised it. And then like I kept doing that because other people were expecting that. But so basically, I think I have like really low tolerance for stress, and that has helped me in address this problem. And so to kind of elaborate, when you are kind of like shackled under, so like when I'm shackled under other people's criteria, that consequently influences my course of actions, and sometimes those things are not what I want to do, and so I naturally get stressed, and especially if that course of action is something I dislike, like I said. So, and the stress is not like my favorite thing in the world, not anyone's, I would assume, but also not my favorite. So having low tolerance for stress usually helps me to disregard and ignore other people's expectations. So yeah, having low stress does help me in this case. But even if I do stick with other people's expectations, it usually doesn't last long because I tend to show my emotions and my thoughts very openly, even when I try not to. And sometimes it's an issue because I can't hide my emotions. And so, for example, if I'm forced to do something because of someone else's criteria, my emotions become apparent, and you can easily sense that I'm not happy, or I'm not happily doing whatever I'm doing. And so showing my emotions helps them, or helps the third party change the situation or adjust the environment for my fitting, or for my appropriate context. And then sometimes, and then so showing emotion does help me in this example again. I guess all in all, I think I mentioned about these like inability to hide emotions, and like all these other aspects of myself, personalities of myself, and I think I'm just kind of trying to like twist it and to look at those personalities in a good way, and how they're helpful in these like situations. If that makes sense. It's like it's just like, yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. I also think I have a low tolerance for stress too, so I do understand how that has helped me avoid situations where I have to base my actions on my actions on others' criteria. But on my end, I've had jobs as a photographer and a videographer that made me feel like I was like a puppet because of how they were instructing me to take certain things, even though I didn't really think it looked good or it was necessary. And they praised me a lot after I took the photos that they wanted to see. But I was obviously disappointed with the results. And like I said earlier, I also do have a low tolerance for stress, so I started declining these jobs that I thought could be done better by somebody else. And I focused more on what I was interested and good at, which led me to make my very first photo books. So I think it's important to have to be honest and have our own criteria, because I think this is what ultimately differentiates us. It makes us who we are, and it gives us the greatest motivation to live an honest life and fulfilling life. And I think by sharing what you think and what you feel about certain things or your criteria to others, in the short term, it might make people leave you. But as Cal Newport says about cutting shallow ties, these people that leave you in this process aren't that important to you anyways. So, and in the long run, I think similar people will naturally attract each other, and constructively influence each other. So I think all in all, it's important to have your own sense of criteria and be open and honest about it. So lastly, the philosopher talks about how life is like a series of dances. And recently in a podcast called Secular Buddhism, the speaker talks about how life is like a game of Tetris, and all we can do is to work with the blocks that are presented to us from the top, and all we can do is just twist it around and place it in different places. And I think they both have a similar message regarding how all we can control is what we do in life. So we can't really be, or we shouldn't really be disappointed by what blocks come from the top. And Aristotle calls this type of lifestyle as anarchaea, where the process is the objective of life. Just like how when we travel, going to a certain country isn't the objective, but rather the process of traveling to the country and spending time there is the true objective. And the contrasting style, where people set tangible goals like moving from point A to point B, is referred to as the kinesis lifestyle. And the author criticizes this lifestyle as he says that planning our lives like this is vain, just like how the speaker in the podcast talked about how we can't control the Tetris blocks that come from the top. So instead of treating and expecting life to be like a solid line, he suggests instead to try to interpret and live life like a series of dots or dances. As, yeah, all we can do in life is to interpret life as a line in retrospect. Everything will look like a line only when we look back. So all these dots create a line in retrospect. And the author brings up an example of a violinist who wants to become pro, and how even this aspiring violinist followed the anarchaea style, even though it might seem like this violinist had an objective to become a pro violinist. But he says that this person, he or she, focused on what they wanted in that moment, and to them it was to play the violin. So that's what she solely focused on, and as a result she became a pro violinist, because that's the activity that she spent most of her time and energy in. So with that said, I wanted to ask, do you think you're living according to a plan that you or somebody else laid out for you, or do you think you're living in the moment or following your curiosity? So are you living a kinesis or anarchaea type of lifestyle?
I think first of all, I think we all think or believe that we live the kinesis lifestyle because we naturally favor certainty. But I think what ends up happening is that we inevitably live a life of a blend of kinesis and anarchaea. I say a blend because people still have the capacity to plan and execute according to their plans, but at the same time life hits you with a wild card now, here and there, and so we kind of resort back to the anarchaea lifestyle as well. So what I like about the question is like we're allowing ourselves to reflect and realize that although we think we are living the kinesis life, we actually aren't, and that like understanding is I think it's important. And so, but to answer your question, I think the majority of my life is on the kinesis track, because ever since I had consciousness, which I would say would be like in high school, I knew I wanted to study in the States and get a job there and live there too. But I'm starting to realize that part of this set of goals I had in mind were stemming from the expectations of my community and not necessarily mine. And so the undertone of the type of community I was in Japan subtly molded my life plan. So that was until now. And I feel like I was feeling a bit stressed when there was a possibility for me to leave the States and having to kind of go back to Japan, or potentially indefinitely too. But luckily, I got into the program, and that was also kind of like my kinesis plan, and so I got to stay here, and my stay here is a little extended now. But I don't think I will stress myself out too much anymore, because it's so true that sometimes just life doesn't give you what you want, and you have to adapt to the situation. And so, like this question, or like these two lifestyles, the anarchaea lifestyle actually kind of helps me, give me not necessarily like excuse, but like it's like a reminder to myself that sometimes it's just out of your control, and that you still did your best given your circumstances. So, I think yeah, like it's good to have a plan, but also don't beat yourself up too much if you derail. Kana? So I want to live more with curiosity now, and a little less pressure, and don't be stressed too much. As we all know, I have a low tolerance of.
Mm. What was the program that let you stay in the States longer?
Oh, this grad program that I'm in right now.
Grad school program. Okay.
Grad school. Sorry, yeah.
I think I'm on a similar boat, since I think my trajectory of life was also molded by people and forces outside of me, with little to no say about it, and it almost feels like I'm a cannonball being loaded into like a cannon, and the people outside are taking aim at something that I don't know or can't see. So it really feels like it's out of my control. But I think this changed midway through undergrad, where I found curiosity in photography and video and tried making that my job. And I think this happened because I had the time and freedom to think about what I wanted to do with my life, while I was engulfed, and I was so busy with assignments and obligations that were set by people outside of me up till then. So I really wish I had more time to think for myself, instead of just busying myself just to fill somebody else's cup. And I agree with you about how life is kind of like a blend between kinesis and anarchaea, as I think as long as the motivation and curiosity comes from within and is aimed to try to contribute to others as a result, I think it can be beneficial to have goals to improve ourselves in the process. Similar to how we can utilize competition to improve ourselves instead of being detrimental to us. And I think right now, I think I'm living more on the anarchaea end of the spectrum, I think I'm focusing more on what I'm curious about and finding ways to contribute to the world as a result. And yeah, as the more I solidify this, I think it's gonna shift more into the kinesis to try to accelerate this process. But yeah, all in all, I think it's a blend, as you said.
I think not only is it a blend, but I guess it shifts, it's dynamic, so it shifts throughout your life. I guess that's what anarchaea is kind of like, right? Like it's like you're dancing, so you are dynamic, and every point in life is like different. But also like I meant like the ratio of kinesis and anarchaea is also dynamic too, depending on your life.
Yeah.
Because some people are dead set on some goals, so it makes sense to be more kinesis than anarchaea.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was a cool point.
Yeah. It's also kind of scary because I think, including myself, I wasn't really aware of whether my life was kinesis or anarchaea. I was just living life, So I gave the metaphor earlier about the cannonball being controlled, where it's aimed by whoever is controlling the cannon. But yeah, like I said, I wish I had more time to think about where I'm aiming at myself. earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, so I think it's and now that we both know about, this is just a model, like I guess anarchaea and kinesis are both just models of lives. They're not like absolute truth, but these models can, just help us simulate and analyze like how our lives are at this current state. And like I think it's cool that like it's something we can use as a, what's it called, like dodai, like
Foundation.
guidelines in our life. Yeah, foundation guidelines. And like, reading books again, like talked about this before, but just knowing or like be exploring and understanding different frameworks and how to look at life is so useful. Even if you don't agree with it, it's just like you get inspired that, oh, there's these kind of way of thinking. But yeah, and I like to kind of bring it back to like the analogy I had earlier about software and hardware updates. I think a lot of our human inclinations are still outdated and obsolete. So reading books, even like, I mean, this book was great, but like learning this is a new iOS 14.5. It's like something like that. I think right now it's 14.4. So it's really cool to be able to tweak your hardware through software kind of stuff.
Yeah, and hopefully these software updates lead to, like you said, the hardware updates or like our actions, because it won't make much sense having. So it's like reading the book is like downloading the software, and putting it into action is like installing it into your device. Because
Yeah.
they're two different parts, right? It's like applying it. You're downloading the package, and then you're applying it into your device, kind of thing. So hopefully we get to do more of the application aspect.
Yeah.
This. All right, so that concludes our 2-part series of this book, The Courage to be Disliked, by Kishimichiro and Koga Fumitake. We hope you enjoyed and were able to take something away to incorporate into your lives. And in the next episode, we'll be having a special guest and be discussing on the book 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. So see you next week. And thank you as always, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.